All right, let's talk about fixed forms. We're going to start with the sonnet, and the sonnet is defined on pages 856, around 857. There's the Shakespearean or English sonnet. There's the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet. And if we read on 771, we'll take a look at William Shakespeare's "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day," which I'm choosing because you've probably at least heard those opening lines. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate, and etc., etc. So if we read the poem, there's an obvious comparison, right? I mean, in the title of the poem, which is actually just the first line, it doesn't really have a title. There's the poet knows that he's making a comparison, right? So I'm comparing the beloved, the person he's addressing, to a summer's day. So if we're talking about figurative language, that's the comparison being made, right? And how does that comparison work? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. So I want to talk about this first quatrain, which is a 4-line stanza. It's not really a stanza, but there are groups of 4 lines here, and then we have the final couplet, because a sonnet has how many lines? 14. So you have 12 lines sort of in this main group, and the rhyme scheme works in quatrains, and then you have the final couplet, which is just a group of 2 lines. And you can see, if you look at it visually, you can see the final couplet is indented, right? And if you look on 856, this is a Shakespearean sonnet, an English sonnet. The poet may pursue one idea through the first 3 quatrains, and then the couplet end with a surprise. So the comparison is being made in the first 12 lines, and then the final 2 lines are, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So we're moving away from the comparison and moving into addressing the actual poem that he's writing, and saying that by writing this poem, you are able to live in this poem. Even though the poem was written in 1609, it exists still 400 years later, right, in the canon of great literature. So the woman, the beloved here, the thee, still exists in the poem. So we're talking about, the figurative, the comparison here is pretty straightforward, so it should be easy to wrap your head around. There's another rhyme scheme, right? But again, let's talk about the rhyme scheme, because it sort of deviates. So I find it interesting, the unit here that I've got in eCollege is called fixed forms. But as you saw in the Tiger, and we'll see here, that the fixed form isn't always fixed. There is room to fudge. And as we get to Bilingual Sestina by Julia Alvarez, we'll definitely see that. So the form of the sonnet, the 14 lines and the rhyme scheme and all those sorts of things, is a basic template, but it can be tweaked a little bit to fit the purpose, right? And so let's read the first quatrain again. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. So day and May rhyme, right? These are full rhymes, A, but our B's are not quite the same. We have temperate and date. So this is another half rhyme. They don't exactly sound alike. And these are what we would call an I rhyme. So if you think about the Tiger, we had I and symmetry, and those words don't rhyme perfectly, but they don't look like each other. But this rhyme is different because they don't rhyme, they're close, but not exact, but they do look exactly the same when we're talking about the rhyming portion of the word. Temperate and date. So we're ending with ATE, even though those letters are not being pronounced in the same way. So it's called a half rhyme, or an imperfect rhyme, but it's also called an I rhyme, because if you were just to look at those words, you see the connection between them, even though when you pronounce them, they're not exactly the same. So that's just something to think about when we're thinking about so-called fixed forms. They're our starting place, but the poet often, there's license to change a few things. And we'll see that when we get to Sestina, the Sestina that we'll talk about, which will be the next video. And then when we talk about the Sherman Alexie one, and you may not even think that it's a poem, you may not think that it's got any form whatsoever, and we'll sort of explore these ideas. So I think the form is important, and it's not a perfect mold that you cut out the poem in. There are ways to deviate within the form.